The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions. At the very edge of known territory, where most civilized beings never dared to venture, a small human research vessel drifted quietly among the stars. The ship looked nothing like the sleek warships that dominated galactic space lanes. Its hull was patched in several places, its engines hummed with an almost comical simplicity, and its weapon systems were so basic they barely qualified as defensive measures. Dr. Kim, Hana floated weightlessly in the ship's cramped laboratory, carefully cataloguing samples from a nearby asteroid field. She had spent 3 months alone out here, documenting mineral compositions and stellar phenomena that might help humanity understand their place in this vast galaxy. The work was lonely, but important. Earth scientists needed every scrap of data they could gather about the universe beyond their solar system. Hana paused in her work as the ship's primitive sensors began chirping. Something large was approaching from the direction of the galactic core. She pushed herself toward the control console, her heart rate increasing as the readings became clearer. Multiple contacts moving in perfect formation, their energy signatures unlike anything in Earth's databases. Light years away, Captain Veltar stood on the bridge of the Zephyrian flagship Dominion's Edge. His scaled skin gleamed under the harsh blue lighting as he studied the tactical display before him. The massive vessel stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, its hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Around it, a dozen smaller warships maintained perfect formation, their crews ready to demonstrate the Empire's might to yet another primitive species. "Captain," his communications officer hissed, "we're receiving transmissions from the alien vessel. They appear to be attempting some form of greeting protocol." Veltar's 4 eyes narrowed as he examined the pathetic craft. On his screen, it was so small that his flagship's main guns could vaporize it without even reducing power to auxiliary systems. The ship's design was laughably crude by Zephyrian standards. Its metal hull looked like it had been assembled by hand, rather than grown in the sophisticated bioforges that created proper starships. "What manner of greeting?" Veltar asked, though he already knew it didn't matter. "Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, basic stellar coordinates," the officer replied. "Standard peaceful contact protocols used by most developing species." On Tsu, her small research vessel, Kim Hana worked frantically at her communications array. She had programmed the computer to transmit every peaceful greeting protocol in Earth's databases. Mathematics, music, simple pictographs showing human anatomy and the structure of their solar system. Anything that might indicate to these approaching aliens that humans came in peace. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched the massive alien fleet close the distance. The lead ship alone was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Its design was organic, almost alive, with flowing curves. That seemed to pulse with internal energy. The weapons ports along its hull could easily house Earth's largest space stations. "Please," she whispered to herself, "let them be peaceful." But Veltar had no interest in peace. The Zephyrian Empire had expanded across 1,000 worlds through a simple philosophy. Overwhelming force applied swiftly eliminated resistance before it could organize. Every species they encountered received the same treatment, a demonstration of power so absolute that surrender became the only logical choice. "Their technology is centuries behind ours," Veltar observed to his tactical officer. "Look at their power output, their crude metal construction, their primitive propulsion. They're barely capable of interstellar travel." The tactical officer's scales rippled with amusement. "Shall we demand their surrender, Captain?" "No," Veltar replied coldly. "We shall make an example. When word spreads of what happens to those who venture into Zephyrian space uninvited, other primitive species will know their place." Kim Hana's blood ran cold as she watched the alien formations spread out around her tiny vessel. She had seen this pattern before in Earth's military history books. It was an attack formation, designed to prevent escape while maximizing firepower concentration. These aliens hadn't come to talk. Her fingers flew across the control panels as she activated every recording device aboard her ship. If she was going to die, she would at least gather intelligence that might help her species survive future encounters. The ship's computers began analyzing everything they could detect about the alien vessels: energy signatures, weapon types, hull composition, formation tactics. "I'm sorry, Earth," she said softly into her personal log. "I tried to make friends with them." Veltar raised one clawed hand. "All vessels, target the primitive craft. Fire on my command." The Zephyrian weapons powered up with a sound like distant thunder. Energy conduits along their hulls began glowing as power flowed from their reactors to their devastating weapon arrays. In seconds, they would unleash enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Kim Hana closed her eyes and activated the emergency transmission protocol. Every piece of data her ship had gathered about the aliens began streaming toward Earth at faster-than-light speeds. The transmission would take months to reach home, but it would arrive with detailed information about humanity's first hostile alien contact. "Goodbye," she whispered. Veltar's hand fell. Fire! The research vessel disappeared in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space. When the light faded, nothing remained but scattered particles of metal and the rapidly dispersing gases that had once been a living human being. "Excellent," Veltar said with satisfaction. "Signal the fleet. We return to base. Let the galaxy know that the Zephyrian Empire tolerates no trespassers." But as his ships turned away from the scene of destruction, they remained unaware of the data stream still racing toward a small blue planet. Kim Hana's sacrifice had given humanity something more valuable than gold, advance warning of what was coming their way. The transmission arrived at Earth's Defense Command at 0347 hours on Mer, a Tuesday morning that would change everything. The quantum relay stations had been humming quietly for months, but suddenly every screen in the facility blazed with incoming data. Dr. Kim Hana's final message streamed across multiple displays, her voice crackling through the speakers as technicians scrambled to decode the alien energy signatures she had died to transmit. Admiral Park Min-ho was sleeping in his quarters when the emergency alert pierced the silence. He rolled out of bed without hesitation, pulling on his uniform as he jogged through the corridors toward the command center. At 62 years old, Park had seen humanity's worst conflicts, from the water wars of the 2040s to the brutal corporate rebellions that had nearly torn Earth apart. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The command center buzzed with activity as analysts worked frantically to process the incoming data. Holographic displays showed the alien fleet in perfect detail, their weapon systems highlighted. In red, their formation patterns analyzed and catalogued. Every piece of information Kim Hana had gathered in her final moments was being studied by the finest military minds on Earth. "Sir," called Lieutenant Park Jimin from his station, "we've confirmed the transmission's authenticity. The research vessel Curiosity was destroyed without warning approximately 14 hours ago." Park Min-ho studied the tactical readouts with growing anger. The aliens had approached a defenseless research vessel, ignored all peaceful communication attempts and destroyed it without even attempting to capture survivors. This wasn't conquest or territory expansion. This was murder, plain and simple. "Get me the emergency council," Park ordered. "Full assembly, authorization level Alpha Black." Within 30 minutes, screens around the command center flickered too, life with the faces of Earth's most powerful leaders. President Chen Wei spoke from her emergency bunker in Geneva, while Director Nakamura connected from the Pacific Defense Grid. Military commanders from every continent joined the encrypted conference, their expressions grim as they reviewed the intelligence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Park began, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. 12 hours ago, humanity made first contact with an alien civilization. They responded by murdering Dr. Kim Hana without provocation or warning. This is not a diplomatic incident. This is an act of war. The room fell silent except for the hum of cooling systems and the soft clicking of keyboards as analysts continued processing data. President Chen was the first to speak. "Admiral, what are we dealing with? How advanced are these aliens?" Park gestured to the holographic display showing the Zephyrian fleet. "Their technology is impressive, but not impossible to counter. They rely heavily on energy weapons and seem to favor overwhelming force over tactical flexibility. More importantly, they made a critical mistake." "Which is?" asked Director Nakamura. "They underestimated us," Park replied coldly. "These Zephyrians have clearly conquered other species before. Their attack pattern suggests they expect immediate surrender after a show of force. They have no idea what they're dealing with. Commander Lee Sojin stepped forward from her position at the tactical station. At 38, she was one of the youngest officers ever to reach her rank, but her reputation for strategic brilliance was legendary throughout the defense forces. "Sir, I've been analyzing their formation data," she reported. "These aliens fight like they've never faced real resistance. Their ships maintain perfect parade formations even during combat operations. They're used to their enemies running away." Park nodded grimly. "Humanity doesn't run. We've been fighting wars for 5,000 years of recorded history. We've perfected killing each other with everything from sharpened sticks to fusion bombs. These aliens picked the wrong species to intimidate." The next 6 hours transformed Earth from a peaceful research civilization into a war machine that would have terrified the planet's ancestors. Commander Lee Sojin coordinated with military bases across the globe, activating defense protocols that had been theoretical exercises just hours before. The orbital shipyards above Earth roared too. Life as construction crews began converting civilian vessels into warships. The massive freight haulers that carried supplies between colonies were retrofitted with military-grade armor and weapon systems. Passenger liners became troop transports. Even the elegant diplomatic vessels were equipped with defensive capabilities. Inside underground facilities that most civilians never knew existed, weapons that had been banned from Earth's wars were brought out of storage. Humanity had agreed never to use their most devastating weapons against each other, but aliens hadn't been part of that treaty. Dr. Song Min-hyuk, head of the Advanced Weapons Division, worked around the clock adapting human technology to counter alien capabilities. The energy signatures Kim Hana had transmitted before her death provided crucial insights into Zephyrian defensive systems. "Their shields operate on rotating frequencies," he explained to the assembled engineers, "but they follow predictable patterns. We can design weapons that adapt faster than their defenses can compensate." Meanwhile, Commander Choi Eunji mobilized the Special Operations Division. These were the soldiers who had ended the corporate wars through tactics so effective they were still classified decades later. Men and women who understood that sometimes the best way to win a war was to make the enemy afraid to fight. "The aliens expect us to meet them in open battle," she told her team leaders. "Instead, we're going to hit them where they don't expect it. Supply lines, communication relays, isolated outposts will make them paranoid about every shadow." Park Min-ho stood in the center of the command room, watching his species transform itself into something the galaxy had never seen before. Other civilizations might surrender after losing a single ship. Humans had a different response to being attacked. "Send a message to all defense installations," he ordered. "Full mobilization. These aliens wanted to send a message by destroying our research vessel. Now we're going to send them a message they'll never forget." The Zephyrians had expected to face a species like all the others they had conquered, primitives who would beg for mercy when confronted with superior technology. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a species that had turned warfare into a science and had been waiting their entire history for a worthy opponent. Earth was ready for war. The first Zephyrian outpost to disappear was mining. Station Keith 7, a small facility on the edge of their territory that processed rare minerals from a nearby asteroid field. The station's automated systems continued sending routine reports for 3 days after the last crew member had vanished. When a patrol ship finally arrived to investigate, they found the facility completely empty but perfectly intact. No signs of battle, no hull breaches, no bodies. The miners had simply ceased to exist. Captain Veltar stared at the report with growing unease. In his 2 decades of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. When the Zephyrian Empire conquered a world, there were always signs of struggle. Burning cities, scattered weapons, the occasional heroic last stand that made for good propaganda footage. But these humans were different. They struck like ghosts, leaving nothing behind but silence. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we've lost contact with Outpost Meridian 12. Veltar's scales darkened with frustration. That made 7 installations in the past month. Each time the same pattern emerged. Normal operations one day, complete silence the next. His superiors were beginning to question his competence, and Veltar couldn't blame them. How do you fight an enemy you never see? 3 sectors away, Captain Choi Dae-ho crouched in the cramped cargo hold of a stolen Zephyrian supply vessel. Around him, 12 of Earth's most elite soldiers checked their equipment one final time. They had been living in this disgusting alien ship for 6 days, breathing recycled air and eating nutrition packets that tasted like cardboard. But the discomfort would be worth it when they reached their target. 2 minutes to docking, whispered Sergeant Kim Ji-won from the pilot's seat. She had learned to fly Zephyrian ships by studying wreckage from previous raids, teaching herself their control systems through trial and error. The aliens never suspected that their own supply runs might be compromised. The ship shuddered slightly as it connected to the docking port of Research Station Valdris 9. Through the thin walls, they could hear the mechanical sounds of cargo transfer. Systems activating. The aliens expected routine supplies. They would get something very different. Choi Dae-ho had spent years perfecting infiltration techniques during Earth's corporate wars. Back then, he had specialized in penetrating the heavily fortified headquarters of megacorporations that treated their employees like slaves. Those executives had thought their security was impenetrable too. The cargo bay doors opened with a soft hiss. Zephyrian workers began unloading containers, their movements efficient and predictable. They followed the same procedures every time, checking manifest numbers and scanning cargo tags. Routine made them careless. The humans struck with silent precision. Each alien worker was disabled before they could raise an alarm, their bodies dragged into hidden compartments. Within minutes, Choi Dae-ho's team had complete control of the loading bay. Phase 1 complete, he whispered into his comm unit. Beginning infiltration. The team split into 3 groups, each heading toward a different section of the station. They moved through the corridors like shadows, using stolen access codes and bypassing security systems with equipment designed specifically to exploit Zephyrian technology. The aliens had built their networks to be efficient and interconnected. That efficiency was about to become their downfall. Lieutenant Han Yuna sat in a hidden bunker beneath the surface of Mars, her fingers dancing across keyboards that controlled some of humanity's most sophisticated hacking programs. She had been a cyber criminal before the war, someone who broke into corporate systems for fun and profit. Now her skills served a higher purpose. The Zephyrians had made a fatal mistake. In their network design, they connected everything to everything else, believing that their encryption was unbreakable. They never considered that someone might turn their own systems against them. I'm inside their primary data core, she reported to her team. These idiots use the same security protocols for their weapons systems as they do for their cafeteria. Menus. Her screens filled with alien text as she navigated deeper into the Zephyrian network. Each outpost, each ship, each weapon system was connected to a vast web of information that stretched across their entire empire. They thought this connectivity made them stronger. They were wrong. Han Yuna began uploading carefully crafted virus programs into their systems. Not the crude malware that damaged computers, but sophisticated code that made systems behave in subtly wrong ways. Navigation computers that were off by tiny fractions. Weapon targeting systems that developed microscopic errors. Life support systems that occasionally forgot to filter the air properly. Back on Research Station Valdris 9, Choi Dae-ho's team had reached the main computer core. They worked quickly, installing hardware backdoors that would give Han Yuna permanent access to this facility and dozens of others connected to the same network. Sir, called Private Lee Ju-hyuk, I've located their communication array. Should I disable it? Negative, Choi replied. We want them to keep talking. The more they communicate, the more access Lieutenant Han gets to their other facilities. The beauty of human tactics lay in their subtlety. The Zephyrians expected grand space battles, fleets clashing in spectacular displays of firepower. Instead, humans fought like a virus, infiltrating their enemy's body and turning it against itself. Within hours, Research Station Valdris 9 had suffered a series of unfortunate accidents. The main reactor developed a coolant leak that forced evacuation. The automated defense systems began targeting each other after receiving conflicting friend or foe signals. The communication array started broadcasting embarrassing personal messages from the station commander to his superiors. By the time Zephyrian reinforcements arrived, they found another empty facility with no signs of combat. The humans had vanished, as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving behind only confusion and broken systems. Captain Veltar paced his bridge like a caged animal. His fleet had responded to 17 distress calls in the past month, but they always arrived too late. The humans struck fast and disappeared before conventional forces could engage them. "These creatures have no concept of honorable warfare," he complained to his tactical officer. "They skulk in shadows and strike from behind like cowards." But his words rang hollow. Honor meant nothing to dead soldiers, and the humans were proving that unconventional tactics could be devastatingly effective. Every Zephyrian installation now lived in fear, never knowing when the next attack would come or what form it would take. The Empire had conquered dozens of species through superior technology and overwhelming force. But they had never faced an enemy that turned their strengths into weaknesses, that used their own systems against them. The humans were rewriting the rules of galactic warfare, and the Zephyrians were losing badly. In hidden bases across human space, more strike teams prepared for deployment. The war was just beginning, and humanity intended to make it a very unpleasant experience for anyone foolish enough to threaten Earth. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire, carried by merchant vessels, diplomatic couriers, and encrypted communications that bounced between star systems. The Zephyrian Empire, a military force that had dominated entire sectors for 3 centuries, was falling apart. Not from internal rebellion or economic collapse, but from attacks by a species no one had ever heard of before. On the crystalline world of Altair Prime, the ancient Council of Watchers convened for the first time in 50 years. These beings had observed galactic politics since before most civilizations had discovered fire, and they had never seen anything like what was happening to the Zephyrians. Elder Kethvar, whose translucent body had lived for over 800 years, studied the intelligence reports with fascination. "These humans," he whispered in his musical voice, "they fight like nothing we have recorded in our archives." The reports painted a picture that defied conventional military wisdom. Zephyrian installations simply vanished overnight. Supply convoys disappeared without sending distress signals. Even heavily defended military bases went silent, their automated systems continuing to function normally while their crews vanished like smoke. "The Zephyrians claim these humans use cowardly tactics," observed Elder Veshna, her forearms gesturing at the holographic displays. "But I see something different. I see a species that has perfected warfare to an art form." Meanwhile, on the industrial world of Corvin 7, factory workers celebrated in secret. The Zephyrians had enslaved their people for generations, forcing them to manufacture weapons and starships for the Empire's endless wars of conquest. But recently, their overseers had become nervous and distracted. Production quotas were ignored, as Zephyrian officers huddled around communication terminals, receiving increasingly desperate reports from across their territory. Foreman Grixtal carefully concealed his joy as he watched a Zephyrian captain pace frantically around the factory floor. The captain's scales, usually a confident blue-green, had faded to a sickly yellow that indicated fear among his species. "Sir," a young Zephyrian officer approached nervously, "we've received another request for reinforcements. Outpost Kepler 9 has gone silent." The captain's claws scraped against his comm device as he tried to contact his superiors. Like most Zephyrian officers, he had built his career on intimidating weaker species. Fighting an enemy that struck from shadows was outside his experience. In the neutral space station that served as the Galactic Assembly's headquarters, representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for an emergency session. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by dozens of species working together to create a place where conflicts could be resolved through words rather than weapons. Ambassador Song Mirai stood at the center of the great assembly hall, representing humanity for the first time in galactic history. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5 feet tall, but her presence commanded attention from beings that towered over her. She had spent her career as Earth's top diplomatic negotiator, resolving conflicts between corporations and nations that had seemed impossible to settle. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems, "I come before you as humanity's representative to address the current conflict with the Zephyrian Empire." The hall buzzed with dozens of different languages as species whispered among themselves. Many had never seen a human before, and Song Mirai looked surprisingly ordinary compared to some of the more exotic representatives present. 3 months ago," she continued, "the Zephyrian Empire destroyed one of our research vessels without warning or provocation. Dr. Kim Hana died while attempting peaceful first contact. Her only crime was existing in space that the Zephyrians claimed as their own." A ripple of recognition passed through the assembly. Many species present had lost ships and colonies to similar Zephyrian territorial enforcement actions over the years. "Since that unprovoked attack," Ambassador Song said, her voice growing harder, "humanity has responded with measured force against military targets only. We have gone to great lengths to avoid civilian casualties, even among our enemies." This was true, though the assembled delegates didn't know the full extent of human capabilities. The strike teams that had been dismantling Zephyrian outposts could have easily targeted civilian populations, but humanity's rules of engagement were strict. Only military installations and personnel were considered legitimate targets. "I stand before you today with a simple message," Song Mirai announced. "Humanity seeks peaceful relations with all civilized species. We offer trade, cultural exchange, and mutual cooperation to any who desire it. But those who choose violence against our people will discover that we are very good at violence in return." Captain Veltar watched the speech from his flagship, his claws digging gouges in his command chair's armrests. He had requested time to address the assembly, hoping to rally other species against what he called the human menace. Instead, he had been told that his request was being considered while the humans were granted immediate speaking time. "This is intolerable," he snarled at his communications officer. "These primitives are being treated as equals to the Empire." But his officer's response was interrupted by another urgent message. 2 more outposts had gone silent, and a supply convoy carrying critical weapons components had simply vanished between star systems. Unknown to Veltar, his Empire's former victims were already making contact with human forces. The Corvin resistance movement had begun providing detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military installations on their world. The aquatic Merketh people, whose ocean worlds had been strip-mined by Zephyrian corporations, offered to hide human strike teams in their underwater cities. Even more damaging to Zephyrian morale, several of their own colony worlds were refusing to send reinforcements. Planets that had been conquered decades ago saw an opportunity for freedom and began declaring independence from the Empire. In the assembly hall, representatives from species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule began approaching Ambassador Song Mirai. The insectoid Vexkari delegate, whose hive worlds had lost billions to Zephyrian slave raids, offered to share intelligence about Empire fleet movements. "Your species fights with wisdom," the delegate clicked in its translated speech. "The Zephyrians understand only force, and you have shown them force they cannot comprehend." Song Mirai accepted each offer of cooperation gracefully, but her message remained consistent. Humanity wanted peace, but they would not be bullied or intimidated by anyone. As news of the assembly session spread across the galaxy, more species began reaching out to establish diplomatic contact with Earth. The Zephyrian Empire's reputation for invincibility was crumbling, and many worlds saw an opportunity to align themselves with the mysterious humans who had accomplished what seemed impossible. Captain Veltar's attempts to portray humans as a galactic threat fell on deaf ears. His former victims were too busy celebrating their liberation to listen to warnings from their oppressors. The mighty Zephyrian Empire was discovering that ruling through fear only worked until someone came along who wasn't afraid. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had made quite an impression. The end came not with the thunder of massive space battles or the dramatic explosion of capital ships, but with a simple communication that arrived at Earth's Defense Command on a quiet Thursday morning. Captain Veltar, his voice hollow with defeat, transmitted the Zephyrian Empire's unconditional surrender from what remained of his shattered fleet. Admiral Park Minho stood in the command center, reading the surrender terms with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The war had lasted 8 months, though it felt like years. Around him, his staff worked quietly at their stations, processing reports from across the former Zephyrian territory, the mighty empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries had collapsed like a house of cards. "Sir," called Commander Lee Sojin from her tactical station, "we're receiving surrender signals from 47 Zephyrian installations across 12 sectors. They're requesting terms for their garrison forces." Park nodded slowly. The Zephyrians had finally realized what the rest of the galaxy was beginning to understand. Humanity didn't just win wars, they ended them permanently. But the Admiral's next words would surprise everyone listening. "Send a message to all Zephyrian forces," he ordered. "Tell them to maintain order in their territories. Inform them that humanitarian aid ships will arrive within 72 hours. Anyone who cooperates with reconstruction efforts will be treated fairly." The communications officer looked confused. "Sir, shouldn't we be demanding their complete disarmament?" Park smiled grimly. "Lieutenant, there's more than one way to win a war. We're about to show the galaxy how humans really fight." The news of humanity's response spread through the galactic community like a shockwave. Species that had expected to see the Zephyrians enslaved or exterminated watched in amazement as human relief ships began arriving at former Empire worlds. Instead of occupying armies, the humans brought medical supplies, food, and engineering teams. Dr. Kang Jiwoo had been an agricultural scientist before the war, working on projects to improve crop yields on Earth's growing colonies. Now she found herself leading the largest reconstruction effort in galactic history. Her transport ship approached the Zephyrian homeworld with a cargo hold full of supplies and a team of specialists who had volunteered to help rebuild a civilization that had been their enemy just weeks before. "Doctor," her assistant called from the navigation station, "we're being hailed by the Planetary Defense Force. They sound confused." Kang Jiwoo activated the communication system. The face that appeared on her screen belonged to a young Zephyrian officer, whose scales were pale with uncertainty. "Human vessel," the officer began hesitantly. We don't understand your intentions. Our intelligence report said you were bringing occupation forces." "Officer," Dr. Kang replied with a gentle smile, "we're bringing grain seeds, water purification, equipment, and medical supplies. Your intelligence reports were wrong. The Zephyrian homeworld had been dying for decades. The Empire's military had consumed so many resources that basic infrastructure had been neglected. Power grids failed regularly, water systems contaminated entire cities, and food production couldn't meet basic needs. The Zephyrian leadership had hidden these problems behind their military might, but now the truth was impossible to ignore. Human engineers worked alongside Zephyrian technicians to repair damaged power plants. Earth's agricultural specialists taught local farmers new growing techniques that could double their harvests. Medical teams treated diseases that had been spreading unchecked through overcrowded cities. But the most remarkable change wasn't technological. It was psychological. For the first time in centuries, Zephyrian citizens began to hope. The Empire had taught them that conquest was the only path to prosperity, that weakness invited destruction. But these humans were proving that cooperation could achieve more than domination ever had. Elder Veshna of the Altair Council watched the reconstruction efforts with fascination. Her species had observed galactic politics for millennia, but they had never seen anything like this transformation. "They're not just rebuilding cities," she observed to her fellow council members. "They're rebuilding an entire civilization's understanding of itself." The humans had established something they called the Galactic Reconstruction Initiative, with Dr. Kang Jiwoo as its director. The program offered aid to any world that had suffered under Zephyrian rule, but with conditions. Recipients had to establish democratic governments, guarantee basic rights for all citizens, and agree to peaceful resolution of conflicts. Former Zephyrian colonies embraced these conditions eagerly. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources began developing sustainable industries. Planets whose populations had been enslaved wrote constitutions that protected individual freedoms. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Captain Veltar found himself in an unexpected position. Instead of being executed or imprisoned, he had been offered a choice: help with the reconstruction efforts or spend the rest of his life in comfortable exile. To his own surprise, he chose to help. "I don't understand you humans," he admitted to Dr. Kang Jiwoo during one of their planning meetings. "We destroyed your research vessel. We killed your people. Why are you helping us?" Dr. Kang looked up from the agricultural report she was reviewing. "Because holding grudges is exhausting," she replied simply. "It's much easier to build something new than to keep fighting over something old." The Zephyrian captain's scales rippled with confusion. In his culture, enemies were either destroyed or dominated. The concept of turning enemies into allies was foreign to him. "But how do you know we won't betray you?" he asked. "How do you know we won't rebuild our military and attack you again?" "You might," Dr. Kang admitted, "but we're betting that you won't. Do you know why?" Veltar shook his head. "Because we're giving you something better than conquest," she explained. "We're giving you prosperity, security, and dignity. People who have those things don't usually want to throw them away for the chance to hurt others." Years passed, and the transformation of the former Zephyrian Empire continued. Trade routes that had once carried weapons and slaves now transported goods and cultural exchanges. Universities replaced military academies. Art and literature flourished on worlds that had known only war. The galactic community watched this transformation with growing respect for humanity. The species that had seemed so dangerous in warfare proved equally formidable in peace. They had taken their greatest enemies and turned them into partners. Ambassador Song Mirai addressed the Galactic Assembly again, 5 years after the war's end. This time, former Zephyrian representatives sat among the delegates, contributing to discussions about interstellar trade and cultural exchange. "We've learned something important," she told the assembled delegates. "The most dangerous species in the galaxy isn't the one that wins wars. It's the one that makes wars unnecessary." Admiral Park Min-ho, now retired but still occasionally consulted on military matters, put it more simply when asked about humanity's approach. "We're dangerous because we're thorough. We don't just defeat our enemies, we turn them into friends. That way we never have to fight them again." The galaxy had indeed learned its lesson. Humanity was dangerous not because they were cruel or ruthless, but because they understood something that had escaped other species for millennia: the strongest. Victory wasn't conquest, but conversion. They had proven that the best way to end a war wasn't to destroy your enemy, but to give them reasons to become your ally. The Zephyrian Empire was gone, but in its place rose something better: a community of worlds that had learned to solve their problems through cooperation rather than conquest. And at the center of it all were the humans, quietly demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply refusing to see others as permanent enemies.